Welcome to another episode of Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students, brought to you by the Union of Jewish Students of the UK and Ireland. I'm Samantha, the UJS Sabbatical Officer responsible for campaigns and inclusion.
And I'm Ellie, a medical student at the University of Nottingham. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Scott Free to the podcast.
Scott is a renowned youth educator, an international award-winning speaker, and an accomplished writer who has dedicated his life to empowering others. Living with HIV for over 3 decades, Scott uses his personal journey to inspire meaningful conversations around love, responsibility, and self-respect. His work offers invaluable guidance and wisdom to young people and those who support them. Scott's message is one of compassion, authenticity, and the power of connection, and we couldn't be more excited to have him here. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah.
Shall we? Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, it's always so interesting to hear my bio read by somebody else because I don't consider all those things when I get up in the morning. I'm just the guy that has to walk the dog and live my life like anybody else. So it's kind of nice to hear all that. Yeah.
Should we start a bit about your upbringing, where you grew up, what your family dynamic was like, and also a bit about perhaps how your Jewish identity shaped your early experience
Yeah. So I was
growing up.
born here in the States, in Brooklyn, New York. And I have an identical twin brother. And in 1963, when I was born, my mom and dad were told that they're having a boy. They didn't know they were having two boys. So the nurses called me baby B, but my mother called me her bonus. So I came into the world um, as though I like to think there's something I had to do. So I just arrived, and but it was sort of an unexpected bonus. And my family was pretty religious in traditional conservative way. We were kosher, walked to synagogue on high holidays, and I was the most religious of all of them. And the reason that I was not just because I loved God and Judaism, but it was my way of connecting with my dad, who was extremely religious. I have a sister, so she was the only girl. I have an older brother who was really athletic, so he had that cornered. I have a twin. The twin brother is so smart, so he got that market, and I needed to find my identity, and it certainly wasn't going to be back then that I'm the gay one, so which I was. So I became the religious one. So I used Judaism in the beginning of my journey here as a mask. Little did I know that I would love it so much, but it really was my way of finding a relationship that was singular with my dad, outside of being the gay son. But now I'm both. So that's how I got my start.
Um, I wonder if you could touch a little bit on what school was like growing up, and any challenges you faced during sort of those middle school and high school years.
I had a good childhood and from the outside, a pretty easy upbringing. Of course, there's the world on the inside that everybody experiences, but it's the invisible life that we mostly hide from people, especially today. Social media will only post generally the good stuff and keep the secrets. Even the things we don't post that are of a secret level, we keep a hidden life. And for me, I was growing up. I never had bad skin. I never had a growth spurt. I'm still waiting to have this when I'm going to get taller. But on the inside, I was full of secrets, and there were many that I had. I didn't know if I wanted to go to college. I wanted to be a dancer, but I ended up going to NYU. I didn't know if God existed, the God of my fathers, the ones who smites and is vengeful. I wasn't sure about that God, but the biggest secret I had was that, and it wasn't even the secret that I'm gay. The bigger than that, in the 60s and the 70s, but I thought I was the only one who had secrets, which I think is something that a lot of teenagers and young adults can relate to, that somehow in our secret world, there's a sense of isolation, and there's the sense that nobody else could really understand what it's like to be me. And if they did, really know me, they wouldn't love me or like me or friend request me or want me in their lives. That sense, we call them negative organizing principles. On the outside, there's so much that we do to fit in, but on the inside, and this is not true just only of me, but all of us, we tell ourselves these lies that we believe the lies that we're told. I'm not beautiful. I'm not lovable. I'm invisible. I'm too much. I'm not enough. None of these things are true, but we buy into it because of what happens in school or at the table at home or in society, in the media or religion. And I believe that. So growing up on the outside, whenever I go to my high school reunions, 10, 20, 30, 40-year reunions, everybody just looks at me and says, you know, you were so popular and we knew you'd succeed in life. And from my perspective, I was so afraid of getting found out. Here's the catch, which I think that everybody can relate to, or at least a lot of people can relate to. On the one hand, I was so afraid that I was going to get caught being the person I'm not supposed to be, you know, not funny, not smart, not straight. In a time in the world in the 60s and 70s when um, the we just were, it was a heterosexual norm. We didn't have LGBTQ plus. We didn't even have the T. The T was separate, and it was LGB, and it was actually GLB. It was gay, lesbian, bisexual at that time in the 60s and 70s. It would change to LG, lesbian first, at the time of the HIV epidemic in the mid late 80s, when we saw there was a lesbian community that was taking care of the gay male community when parents from other parts of the country and the states here wouldn't come and visit their dying sons, and they wouldn't because of the shame, because of the stigma, the taboo of having a gay son and a HIV positive son. And so it was a lesbian community that took care of us, really sat by literally the head of the bed where we would be dying, and they would wipe our foreheads with witch hazel and be with us to our dying breaths. And so it changed from GL to LG in the mid to late 80s. But growing up, uh, I all there was gay and lesbian and bisexual, and the others didn't come along. Or at least the trans community was even more invisible than it is today. And so I was so afraid of being the person I'm not supposed to be, getting caught being that person, being found out, not being the person I'm supposed to be. And at the same time, here's the paradox. We don't want to get caught being the person we're not supposed to be, and we desperately want to get caught, or at least find someone in the world who gives us permission to be that person. So I think it's true of not just me, but most teenagers and young adults I've ever met. We live in this paradox, this great paradox. On the one hand, I don't want you to know about me. On the other hand, please, someone see me and love me for what I'm afraid to show. And that paradox is what makes us, in part, suffer and feel like we're isolated and long for an opportunity to be in the presence of others who allow us permission to be who we are. And here's the key that I was looking for when I was a teenager, and I want to offer the students that I inspire or try to inspire today. It's this: it is rare to be a person who you're in the privilege of, someone who loves you for who you are and gives you permission to be who you are, your secret life as well as the life that you share, even if who you are isn't who you want to be. So let me say that again, because it's really big. What is important, what is healing, is to find a few people who love us exactly for who we are, even if who we are isn't who we want to be right now. They can love us into wholeness. And those people are everywhere, but we've got to take a chance on them. We've got to take a risk on letting ourselves be loved that way, unconditionally. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's like a lot to sort of think
It's a
about and
lot.
take back. But
Okay, so simply put, let me just put it real simple. The goal of an elegant life, which is more than what most people are asking for. We just want to do okay, survive, have some happiness. I think we should add one more goal, and that is elegance. The goal of a whole, healthy, elegant life is to surround yourself with a few loving others, loving others who love us for who we are and give us permission to be who we are until we're comfortable with that ourselves, who love in us the things we have not yet learned to love in ourselves.
Um,
I
I'm
don't really know how to follow that.
yeah. I guess my question would be sort of who was that support network for you? Like who
And
helped
here's the catch,
you
right? There
elements of life?
there are people. There's always people who were mine. And the bigger question is, if I knew who they were, what did it take for me to take a risk on them? That's the bigger question, I think. So, as one of my books, on the very back of the book of letters from teenagers, on the back cover, it says a letter from a teen, a Jewish teenager, that said, "Please write back because I have no place else to turn." And a camp counselor approached me that summer and so held up my book and said, "This isn't true." And you put it on the back of your book, and it's just not true. It's not true that there's no place else to turn, and we can't, and he's so correct, allow or enable our youth to think and to believe that there's nobody there for them. It feels like there's no one there for them, but it doesn't mean that there isn't anybody there for them. So that's how I will answer your question. Who was there for me? There was somebody. There was my great aunt Mindel, who survived Auschwitz, who would say to me in Yiddish every Sunday night in Brooklyn, "Skadi," with her Polish accent, "Skadi," three times, "Skadi. Tuch is oifen tish, put your tush on the table. Show me who you are." She'd push a plate of babka and cookies in my way. She was a babka pusher. And she'd say, with love and cookies, same thing, by the way, "Tell me your secrets. Lay them down so I can love you more. Ich soll dir lieb haben mehr. Give me more of you to love. So I will love you more when you tell me your secrets." They existed, those people in our lives that I like to call the come here people, C apostrophe M-E-R-E, the ones who literally say, "Come here." Not "come here," because that's when you're in trouble. "Come here now." But the "come here. I've got some cookies for you. I've saved a seat for you. I want to tell you a secret. Let me love you." They exist, but the goal here, in order to have them for them to be effective, right, is to take a chance on them. So in my life, yeah, my great aunt Mindel, her husband, my uncle Fischel, who was on Schindler's List and survived 5 concentration camps, but I didn't take a risk. She'd say, "Tell me everything, Toches and Tish," and I would tell 3/4 of what's going on. And she'd even say to me one day, she said, "Skadi, Skadi, we had fagelas in the shtetl back in Poland," which was her way of saying, "Tell me more. I know, and I want you to know that I know, and I want to love you. Tell me what's going on." And I still wouldn't. I would tell her in some of my life, but not enough. So, yeah, they existed, and they exist for us all. I'd like to believe that. But it's up to us to take a chance, take a risk, and to be able to feel that we're safe in the presence of someone who will give us permission to love, to feel loved for who we truly are. So it's twofold. For me, they existed. It was my great aunt Mindel and some others, but for me as well, I still didn't want to take a chance. Why? I grew up in a time in the world when it wasn't trendy and cool and expected to be somewhere on that spectrum, LGBTQ, or to know someone who certainly is, right? Nowadays, in 2024, there are so many different versions of variations on how to come out that we've got a much larger acronym. Back then, I wouldn't come out of the closet. There were no role models. There were no artists who were performing and acting out of any closet. And so I didn't see how I was going to be able to survive that. I didn't want to be the first. And I stayed in, even though my great aunt Mendel was trying to pull me out. So to that, I say, if you're going to be a Khmer person, you want to be the arms for somebody else, the unconditional radical acceptance and love for someone who's in the closet. One of the ways to do that is, instead of getting them to come to you, you go to them. You tell them about your life. You tell them about what secrets you've harbored, and how a model for them what courage looks like, what vulnerability looks like, to be able to say, "This is what I'm holding on to, and I trust you with it. Now, maybe you'll trust me," right?
I think what you've picked up on is a really, really like deep and meaningful point about reminding people that somebody has their back, and that I sort of wonder on that what. So you've sort of talked about being open to other people, um, but do you have anything more that you want to add on what else that we should be doing as a society to remind our friends that we're backing them and that they can trust us?
So I would take the word society out and just make it really small as a friend. Just the whole idea of psychic numbing, society, 6 million Jews, 4,000 people in 9/11, all those giant numbers. Society is it's so large. But one-on-one, what can you, your BFF, AA, your best friend forever and always, what can you, the person who you're sharing some of your life with, what can that one person do? You, who's listening to this, watching this podcast right now, what can you do in addition to what I've said? Listen carefully. It's going to sound poetic, but it's really true. It's our job as loving others, as the Khmer people in other people's lives, to do three things. One, to hear what others are not saying. What's written in between? What are they trying to say in between what they're saying? What's in the silence? What's in the space between the words? What's in their body language? What's in the omissions? What's in their heart? Two, to see the things that they're not showing by looking at their body language, by being mindful of the fact that there's so much more, so many other ways to communicate, to see them as who they want to be. But here's the big one, three, to love in them what they can't love in themselves, which I said earlier. So when somebody shares about their body image issues or their gender confusion or their fear of sharing the fact that they don't have gender confusion, but they're concerned that there are people who won't honor their pronouns and the journey that they're on, or something that's dire like suicidal ideation because they don't think that they belong, they've run out of options, and anything in between. To love in them what they have not yet loved in themselves means to really hold them in a place where you see, and in their presence, maybe they can see that they're magnificent, especially in their pain, that they're still valuable and they're still lovable, completely lovable, especially in their pain. I'll give you an example, Ellie. When my father was dying of liver cancer, I was in the hospital with him at visiting hours, and my entire family left, and I stayed. Visiting hours were over, but I stayed after. And I remember watching some baseball, American baseball, with him. And he said, Scotty, I want to thank you for coming out of the closet to me when you did many years ago. And I want to thank you for sharing your HIV status with me as well. And I said, Dad, really, it's fine. That's years ago. Let's just watch the Yankees beat the Red Sox for the last time in history. And he said, no, I really want you to hear this. And it was one of those final days of his life. And he was making sure that everything was said. He said, when you told me that you're gay years ago, and when you disclosed your HIV status to me, what you did was give me more of you to love. We think about ourselves with our negative organizing principles. We said earlier, the I'm not enough, that I'm invisible. If you knew the real me, you wouldn't love me. The real me, the stuff that I'm wrestling with, as well as the things that I dream about. But the truth is, it's those negative organizing principles, which are never true, but we think they are. Once we lay them out, put them in front of someone who receives us in a loving, unconditional, radically unconditional way, we get a chance to be loved by them and loved more, hopefully see the magnificence that we are. They hold it for us. And my dad was saying, you gave me more of you to love. He was saying, I saw in you the thing that you thought was shameful as something that is lovable in you. Vulnerability is our strongest moments. When we are vulnerable, we are at our most strong. In the right place, in front of the right, appropriate people. But that's real power. And in those moments, we're giving those Khmer people more of us to love. And to answer your question again, Ellie, it's in reverse. If you're the Khmer person and somebody is revealing to you and being vulnerable to you, it's really important. We never judge. We don't grade. We don't scold. We don't try to top them with our story. What we do so much in life, in thinking that we're communicating and we're helping other people to feel safe because we're sharing, we end up overtaking their vulnerability and their share and saying, oh, you think you got problems? Let me tell you about mine. You had a bad day? Well, mine was worse. And we deny them the opportunity and dismiss the opportunity that they're trying to have, which is to be seen and accepted and loved for who they are. So how do you do that? You just repeat back what you heard. So you're telling me this, you're telling me that. I love you for that. I appreciate you for that. I admire you for that. The opposite of bullying is admiration. And in fact, I would say they're kind of the same. I think that all of us are longing to connect on a really deep level. Bullying is a type of connection on a very primitive level. It's a way of connecting with somebody and not being able to say, I find you interesting, or there's something about you that scares me, and I don't know how to do that, so I'm going to bully you instead. It is a primitive form of connection. But much more advanced would be to be vulnerable in front of somebody and to admire them, to flip it over and say, I really wish I could be more like you. I like what you've got. I want some of that. And then ultimately, to me, the most valuable, the highest form of connection is forgiveness, accepting people for who they are and understanding they're doing the best they can at that time. Their best may not be our best, but it is. So simply put, love in others what they have not yet learned to love in themselves.
I think that that's an incredibly powerful message, especially when, you talked about how you didn't take that risk when you were younger, and sort of that encouragement to remind people to sort of speak out and to know that there will be people and that there are people who do love them and who will give them that admiration, and will provide them with that elegance, which you also mentioned earlier. Um, I was wondering, sort of, it's very clear that your Jewish identity and sort of your heritage has played a really huge role in sort of your growth and your journey. I was wondering if you could touch a little bit more on that. Um,
Yeah. So when I got my HIV diagnosis 37 years ago, next month was when I got infected, and I got my diagnosis 6 months later. When I found out, suddenly Sukkot took on a whole new meaning. The first Sukkot after my diagnosis, I remember standing in a sanctuary in New York City. It's October, and the sunlight, is streaming through the stained glass windows of the sanctuary. And the smell of the etrog and the sound of the lulav shaking and the processional of congregants singing Hoshana, Hoshana, save me, God, redeem me, God, deliver me, dear God, help us, Hoshana. Suddenly, Judaism became three-dimensional. Up until then, it was something we did every year in October. And it smelled great, and it was the lulav, and it was the sukkah. And now it had a depth to it, a heft to it, a beautiful weight because of the awareness of how short our time here really is. And for me, it was HIV that got me there, or at least the diagnosis. But for anybody listening to this podcast right now, it's their parents' divorce, it's their body image issues, it's the time that they were bullied and believe what they heard, it's the time they look in the mirror and don't really love the reflection staring back at them and say in the mirror, not beautiful, just not beautiful. And I'm not just talking about females, I'm talking about males who want to be beautiful and non-binaries who want to be beautiful, and not just seen as that way by others, but by ourselves, to accept ourselves as we are. And so life presents its lessons to all of us. For me, it was the HIV, but for anybody else listening right now, and for the two of you as well, there are things that have made you consider the meaning of time and how you're going to spend it and what you're going to do with it so that when you lay your head on the pillow each night, you can hear the sound of the day and you can imagine how you spent it and how you want to spend the rest of your days. For me, it was just HIV, but we're all the same. We've all got at least one, if not more, things that have happened to us and that help us understand the hearts of each other. We're all going through it. My journey is my journey and yours is yours, but it helps me understand your heart, which helps me love you more, which helps us heal.
And in terms of your relationship with the community, and the Jewish community more broadly, I mean, obviously growing up at a time where both being gay and having HIV was incredibly stigmatized, how did that, how did you find your relationship with the community change, um, as you sort of discovered yourself, your sexuality, and then also subsequently, as you sort of grappled with, um, the HIV diagnosis?
So I'm going to say this with some humility. There wasn't a lot that Judaism was doing in 1987 on behalf of HIV positive people in the States. That's my vantage point. Uh, there wasn't a lot, and then I stepped in with a few others and started to lead the charge and saying that it's also a Jewish issue. It happens to Jews as well. Uh, Big nod out to Shelley Marsh at the time she was working at Makor. Now she's other places, who brought me to England and said, "Well, we're gonna make this happen," and helped me to educate in the Jewish community in England as well to actually do what you're saying, Ali. Um, I I remember my father's rabbi, the rabbi that was that bar mitzvahed me when I was growing up on Long Island, who said to me, "Listen, I know I got it. I know you want to speak in the Bima, but I can't let you." This is 1988, 1989. Just can't really let you do it. It's way too difficult. It's so stigmatized, so taboo. I get it now. I get it. But then there are others who took a bigger risk, like Shelley, and said, "We're going to make this happen." Right? But it's also really important to understand that it's still kind of, I hear you say, it was such a stigma back then. Still kind of is. Now, in fairness, I haven't been to Lamud in a while, but I've been there twice. I've spoken twice in Lamud. And the last time I was there was about 10 years ago, in fairness, 10 years ago. And of the hundreds of programs that were being offered to attend and the thousands of people who were in attendance, I was the only one talking about AIDS. The only one. I can't be the only Jew that talks about safer sex and HIV in a high profile way. Still needs to be more people talking about comprehensive health education, sexual health education, especially the new things that are happening in HIV and AIDS in the world of medicine around HIV and AIDS, because we have grown so much and we can really stop the spread of this virus with what we know, but we're not teaching it outside of Judaism, within Judaism. So, and just being a little provocative here, we can still do more, and we need to do more.
And before we sort of go directly into that, just specifically on sort of educating Jewish organizations and Jewish people in Jewish communities about HIV and AIDS and LGBT issues in general, what would you say you've learned from engaging with the communities on these topics, and do you think the response has changed, and how have you seen it change, and where do we still need to go?
Yeah, there's been tremendous change, tremendous. Well, I'm going to say it this way. There was a time that just wasn't talked about in the 80s, and then we started making it happen. I remember when my parents, I wanted to go to a support group for parents of children with HIV, and there was nothing this is the 80s, there was nothing in Judaism. No synagogue that was holding or hosting, sponsoring a support group. So I sent them to a church a few miles from our house. That's the only place they could go for the support at the time. That changed in the 90s and the 2000s. And Judaism stepped in and started doing a lot more synagogues. In fact, so many synagogues have brought me in to speak and have had this and Jewish youth organizations, both in the States and in England, to really make this an issue that has to, be attended to. Lately, there's been a fall off because of a few reasons. One, uh, we had COVID. So when we talk about HIV, that was last century's pandemic. Now we've got COVID. And in fact, literally in the States here, when in 2020 COVID took place, first came on the stage, the many researchers who were working in the field of HIV, looking for a vaccine or a cure or better pharmaceuticals, were taken off of those tasks and moved right into COVID work. And they just had to, right? And it's fascinating that in 1 year or less than a year, 4 different types of vaccines were created for COVID. Mazel tov, amazing, miraculous. And in 45 years of studying the virus, HIV, still no vaccine. Just let that sink in for a second. But in terms of where we can go from here, I think it's really, really important that we teach Jewish teenagers. Oh, there's one more thing I wanted to say. And in fairness, another reason that it fell off, and it's not only because of COVID, and this is a delicate thing to say, but many synagogues, understandably, are not doing other programs outside of October 7th in Israel. Understandably, no hard feelings, not holding a grudge. I am suggesting that we need to still talk about other things. Hillels all over my country. I imagine, I don't know what it's like in JSOX, but many of the programming, most of the programming these days is devoted, understandably, to what's happening in Israel right now and on college campuses around anti-Semitism. And I'm going to say this again, I'm not against it. I think it's great that the attention and the money is going there. We also need to bring in other speakers to talk about other things too, like this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think to some extent it's really important that we do talk about it, and it's really important that we are tackling those issues. But fundamentally, if that's all that a university experience is, then we never really get a wider um a wider like understanding of the world that we live in. And actually, what's the point of going to university if everything we have to focus on is that? And we
In
need to
fairness, I
take
do want to say that,
seriously.
yeah, what is the point? I just want to make sure that I say for the record that I don't know for a fact that there's nothing else happening on college campuses. I don't know enough about that. I do know that it's not enough. There still needs to be more.
Yeah, I mean things are happening. Um and
Sure.
also and also, we need to celebrate Jewish life and celebrate the things that make us who we are. And that's really, really important. Um and sometimes it's very easy to forget that there must be more to university life sometimes than this sort of pressures of fear and worry of anti-Semitism. Um and that is, thank you for raising that. And that's of course not to at all undermine the importance of also talking about October 7th,
Right.
um, and everything that goes on, and everything that is happening in Israel right now. Um, do we want to perhaps now talk a bit about that sort of that bit that
Yes.
some of what you come in to talk to schools and talk to
Yes.
people about in terms of HIV?
Let's do it
Um,
here.
and so I think you were 24 when you were diagnosed with
Yes.
HIV.
I was 24.
Um, so for those people listening who don't really know that much about HIV, would you mind just sort of elaborating very briefly on what HIV is and how it affects your body, and perhaps because sometimes it's quite confusing what the difference is between HIV is and
And
AIDS.
innate. So also for those of you who are listening, so 24 in 1987, if you're doing the math, 61 now. And that's a big deal to be able to say that I now have a cardiologist and I have cholesterol issues and I have arthritis in my toes. Like I'm dealing with stuff that you get when you live to that age, which is so awesome. So awesome. Well, arthritis really hurts, but it's awesome to have regular people issues. So HIV, AIDS, and the difference, and real quickly. So HIV is a virus. AIDS is what happens when that virus takes over or successfully takes over the immune system and it turns into what we call AIDS. AIDS doesn't exist in a petri dish, or you can't culture AIDS. It's an acronym, and this is one of my pet peeves. It's all capital letters. It's not capital A, small IDS. It's the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. It's a syndrome, it's a condition, it's a series of events that occur after HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus, succeeds in taking apart your immune system by specifically attacking the T cells in your body, one after the other. So you have not enough T cells, which are the soldiers, the generals in the army of your immune system, to defend you from infections from outside and also that are already inside. That's the difference between HIV and AIDS. Really, AIDS should be called HIV disease, HIV being the virus, and HIV disease slash AIDS being what happens when the virus is successful. Today, we don't see as many AIDS cases because HIV is being successfully attacked, repressed, suppressed by the meds that are working. The world of AIDS is all acronyms. And so here's another acronym: ART, antiretroviral therapy, or HAART, highly active antiretroviral therapy. Those are the meds, those are the pills, that's the cocktail. They call it a cocktail. Combination therapy, combination of two, three, four types of drugs in one, or pills in that are fighting the virus. So because of the efficacy of these meds, if a person gets on them, then we rarely see a person with HIV becoming infected or becoming somebody with clinical AIDS, as we say, developing AIDS. But in terms of educating your listeners, there are three and only three ways you get infected. Only three: not casual contact, not hugging somebody who's sweating, not somebody who with HIV has just sneezed in the air and you breathe that air, or used their towel to wipe your hands on that they used, or drinking out of their soda can. Even kissing. Can get it from kissing. Casual contact, although kissing may not be so casual, but casual contact, not going to happen, right? There are three and only three ways you get it. One, a mother can infect her child. If she herself is infected, the baby can be born with the virus in the birthing process. Or two, if not born with the virus, can get it from breastfeeding, mother's milk. We rarely see that in developed countries today. We see it in non-developed countries and continent of Africa because of the cultural expectation of breastfeeding in Honduras or in parts of Africa, for example. But mother to child, and then two, blood and blood products, but really coming into contact with somebody's infected blood. But it's very rare that my infected blood would somehow get into your body, because you'd have to have an opening, a cut, a sore. It's not easy. It's very rare. The real way that HIV infected blood gets into somebody else's body is because of the use of IV drugs, Latin, intravenous, into the vein. And so IV drugs, sharing needles, the needle itself, not the chamber where not the needle, because not the needle itself. The virus that's in the blood on the tip of a needle dies once it hits the air. But it's the blood that's backed up in the infected blood in the chamber. If you're sharing needles, sometimes there's something known as drawback. The blood in one person gets stuck in pulled back into the chamber of the syringe. And then that has a shelf life of a good few weeks because it's airtight host, and then that can be injected into another person's body. So IV drugs. And the third and the only other way that a person can come into contact and therefore get infected. Exposure doesn't always equal infection. Exposure doesn't always equal infection. But the third way that you can be exposed that could lead to infection is unprotected sex, which, by the way, in the world today, lexicon today, we don't even say unprotected sex anymore. We say condomless, because there is something pejorative, stigmatizing about unprotected, unsafe, right? So the condomless sex. But what type of sex? It has to be either vaginal sex, penile vaginal, anal sex, or very rare cases, oral sex. But it's possible, but it's very rare, but it's possible. Those types, not grinding, not mutual masturbation, not um, something that's casual, that's not the exchange of fluids. And so listen carefully to everybody who's listening and watching right now. This is the equation I want you to write down and memorize. It's one sentence, and it goes like this. Do not allow somebody else's, because it's about four fluids that you don't want to come into contact with in your body. Four fluids, not saliva, not sweat, not tears, not urine, and not saliva, because again, kissing is safe. You can't get infected from somebody's saliva, even if they have HIV. Kissing is safe. You can't get infected from kissing. You could get herpes, but you're not going to get HIV. So this is the sentence I want you to remember, memorize this. Do not allow somebody else's blood, semen, vaginal fluid, breast milk, and a fifth one, rectal fluid, onto your open cuts or sores, something that would require a Band-Aid, or into your pink, wet, fleshy, exposed, and easily torn mucous membranes. What's a pink, wet, fleshy, easily exposed, and torn mucous membrane? Under your eyes, red. The nostrils, mucous membrane, pink, fleshy, moist. In the mouth, everywhere that's not your teeth or the top of the tongue. That would mean the mucous membrane in the mouth is the back of the throat, under the tongue, the palate, your gums, inside your cheeks. If it could tear, it's a mucous membrane. And then in the rest of the body, you've got the vagina, the anus, and the tip of the penis, the opening to the urethra, the urinary tube, urethra. So again, the equation, I need you to know, which is not being taught in health class, and it only takes a minute, not a full semester, not a 6-week curriculum, is one sentence. Do not allow somebody else's blood, semen, vaginal fluid, breast milk, or rectal fluid onto your open cuts or sores or into your pink, wet, fleshy, exposed, easily torn mucous membranes. That's how you stay away from HIV and also, incidentally, chlamydia and gonorrhea.
I was sort of
It's a lot, I know.
a lot of information, and it's incredibly important information that, you know, we're just not really taught about
Yeah.
in sort of education, but sort of understandings of HIV by both medical professionals and society were very sort of scarce, and there was a failure to sort of do research into what was happening. Um, what were your expectations when you were diagnosed, and what were you told by medical professionals and the people around you, and how do you think that, you know, those conversations would be shifted if it in sort of today's day and age, and what are the things that you feel have stayed the same?
Okay. Such a great question. Thank you, Sam. When I found out, it was 1988, and it was a death sentence. I was not actually given a prognosis. Um, the doctor didn't say that. Actually, it wasn't even a doctor. It was a healthcare professional who just gave me my results and did not know what else to say. There was no meds back in 87, the end of 87. It was the beginning of the AZT, which was a cancer drug from the 60s that was put on a shelf and then taken off the shelf in the 80s to work somehow not so effectively against HIV at the time. So they gave me a phone number of a place to go to get some support. And because it was Mount Sinai Medical Center in New York City, and it was Beth Israel. It had the word Israel in it. I thought, oh, that's good. It's Beth Israel. But it was a support group of people who were methadone. They were heroin addicts who were trying to use methadone to not be addicted anymore. And I didn't want to sit in a support group of addicts because I was not one of them. I didn't feel like I was one of them. But I came to understand at that time, it doesn't matter what I label myself as. I'm not a drug user. I'm not a hemophiliac. I'm not a Haitian. I'm not a risk group, homosexual, gay person. What I came to understand is we all have something in common, the H in HIV. We used to call it the H disease. If you're a member of a group of people that began with a letter H, hemophiliac, people who are born with clotting factor that doesn't work, so you need thousands of units of blood to help you, not units of blood, but thousands of blood put together in a bag of blood that would be able to give you enough clotting factor. Haitians, we thought that Haitians were bringing into this country. We were wrong, but we needed to marginalize some group. We had to have a common enemy. Who was better than the IV drug users and the heroin addicts? But who better than that? The gay community. Marginalized, targeted groups. We forgot the most important H in HIV, which is what? Human. And so to sit in a support group with a bunch of IV drug users, my judgment was I had nothing in common with them. Truth was, I had everything in common with them. We're human and we're longing for connection. That's it. And so in the beginning, there was really not a lot of options for where I could go to get the help I needed. But I did find a support group, this one really emotional support group, it was really helpful. And it was the actual support group from which the musical Rent is based. It's in the musical. They call it life support in the musical. Back then, it had a different name, and that was helpful. And there were other lanes of activism that were started back then. There was ACT UP, right? It was AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. Everything's an acronym. ACT UP was a way to find an outlet to be eloquent in our rage, to find ways to get the pharmaceutical industry to release or race through the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, drugs that we needed to be approved sooner. And it was eloquent in their rage, and there were creative ideas that were very, very controversial, and it was another lane that people took. And there was the theater, it was the musical Rent, just a few TV shows and movies like Philadelphia that started to bring the issue of AIDS into the different people. So there were many different lanes that people took. The quilt, the Names Project quilt that was started in '87, names and things that belonged to people who died of AIDS, put together, sewn in needle and thread on a tapestry that now is too many football fields long to be able to unveil in its entirety. And today, it's changed. We just don't talk about it anymore. We don't talk about it in high school. We don't talk about it in college. We don't talk about the things that we now know. So that I teach at a college in in Maine, every January. It's a 1 month semester, and it's the 1 month of the year I get to be called professor. And in one of my classes, I asked one of the students, a black student, in fact, all of them, why are you taking my class? And they all complimented me and said, we heard you're a great professor, so we wanted to take your class. And one student said, I'm here, 19 years old, from Texas. I'm here because I just got my HIV diagnosis. This is 2019. I just got diagnosed with HIV and I want to learn. Now, the fact that a 19-year-old in 2019 would still be getting infected with HIV when we know so much about how to protect yourself and it's so accessible, the meds are accessible, but the information is not, it's not out there, is devastating. We don't have to see that anymore, but we are seeing that. So in the beginning, when I was given my diagnosis, it was a life sentence, a death sentence, and I thought I got 3 years to live. And then I lasted 37. I'm ending my year of double chai, 36 years. And there are still young adults getting infected today because we're not doing enough. Did I answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, and I think that you've sort of highlighted that even though sort of there have been incredible medical advances, there is still that stigma and there's still that lack of education and awareness that even people who have been, as you were saying, who have been diagnosed and who have all these medical treatments and access don't actually know what it is that they have or know what the idea around it or the stigmas. They still believe all of those stigmas, and I think that, that's something that we should be taking away from that, yes, there are incredible medical advances, but those advances need to be made in society, as well. So I guess, my question would be, um, do you like how will the stigma decrease, like with more knowledge, and how do we sort of go about encouraging or campaigning for better knowledge on these issues?
I don't know how you go about campaigning for better issues. I've been trying for 32 years, especially in the Jewish community. And I'll give you a proactive answer. we need to bring back comprehensive sexual health education, including HIV and AIDS education in Hebrew schools, in high schools, in middle schools, in universities, at youth groups, around the kitchen table. In order to remove the stigma, it needs to be talked about just comfortably, and it needs to be something that everybody knows. And so, if I may take the reins for just a moment, can we use this opportunity right here, this podcast, as an opportunity just to do that, to do some education? Because I did answer your question earlier, but Ellie, about what is the difference and what is it? But let's talk about, for a moment, the advances we have today. Let's talk about PrEP and PEP and U equals U and TASP and DoxyPEP. These are terms that I wish every person listening right now would say, oh, I know what PEP is, and I know the difference between PEP and DoxyPEP, and I know what U equals U stands for, and as a result, I'm not afraid anymore. And I know what treatment as prevention is, and I want people to know this as much as they know anything else. So can we do that? Can we go over that?
You stole my next question, so
Okay.
please.
All right. So now in our world, we now know about things like, first of all, PrEP. Because, well, let's go back even further. Let's go back to undetectable. So when a person is HIV positive, that means there's HIV virions, particles of HIV in their bloodstream and other parts of their body, but mostly their bloodstream. And the goal of the virus is to go from T cell to T cell. It's the goal of any virus is to survive. That's the goal of any virus, just stay alive. Now we have these meds, the highly active antiretroviral therapy, the meds that I'm on, a person with HIV is on for the rest of their lives. And if they're effective, and they are, if a person's staying on them on a regular basis, that means that the virus that's in their body is reduced, suppressed to levels of not being detectable. And the word we use is undetectable. Undetectable means that when you give a sample of blood, a test tube of blood, and they run it, they find out how much HIV is in that blood sample. We find out it's not detectable on a highly fine-tuned test. 10 years ago, undetectable, 15 years ago, undetectable was 200 virions or less in a test tube of blood, in a thimble of blood, in a drop of blood. 200 particles of HIV. Today, in 2024, almost 25, undetectable, because the machinery is, the technology is so finely tuned, it's minus 20 particles of HIV, minus 20 virions of HIV in that one drop of blood. Now, that's still a lot of virions when you think about how much blood you have in your body. But it went from 500,000, 300,000 to minus 20. That means that you're undetectable. Now, undetectable means you're untransmittable. It's still not a word in my iPhone. It still autocorrects. That's how new this is, or not catching on this is. Undetectable equals untransmittable. Acronym U equals U. The letter U equals the letter U. What does that mean? If it's 20 copies or less per drop of blood, cubic milliliter, that means that there's not enough HIV in that person's body, and commensurate with their blood, their semen, their vaginal secretions, their breast milk, whatever fluids leave your body that the virus lives in, it's not enough to transfer the virus. Which means that a person with HIV who's undetectable on their meds cannot give the virus to somebody else. So if you're undetectable, U equals U means untransmittable. That's one way of protecting people from getting infected from a public health perspective. The second way is something known as PrEP. U equals U refers to people with HIV. PrEP refers to people without HIV. Undetectable, I'm talking about people with HIV. PrEP, I'm talking about people who are HIV negative, right? So now bring in the HIV negative part of this. If you don't have HIV, you could take a type of medicine, a drug that's called PrEP, which another acronym, stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis. Prophylaxis being a fancy word for protection. Pre-exposure, before you get infected, before you get exposed, before you have condomless sex. What does that mean? It's a type of HIV medication that I would take but it's only part of the larger cocktail for HIV positive people that negative person, HIV negative person, would take on a regular basis. And if they take it on a regular basis, they do not get infected with HIV. It's 98% effective. So if you put the two together, you've got a person who's undetectable HIV hooking up with a condomless sex with a person who's on PrEP. It becomes an impossibility to get infected. Now then, there's something known as PEP, PEP, which also stands, another acronym, stands for post-exposure. Pre-exposure PrEP, post-exposure PEP, prophylaxis. If the condom breaks, if, God forbid, there was coercion or rape, if you were or that person was drunk or under the influence of some drugs and doesn't remember what they did the night before, you've got up to 3 days, 72 hours, 3 days. It's 48 hours in England, 72 hours. And I trust that bet much more than what we have here, which is 3 days, to get on a regimen of PEP, which is also similar, actually is the HIV medication, similar to what I'm taking, for 28 days, less than a month. And you take it for 28 days, and then we find that the person who's on PEP, who was exposed to the virus, remember, exposure doesn't always equal infection, doesn't come up positive, doesn't get infected for two reasons. One, we don't even know if the person that they hooked up with, they didn't use a condom with, even had HIV. We may not know that. And two, it works, but it gives you some wicked side effects. Not fun. And you'll be saying to yourself for 28 days, I'll never do that again without a condom. So that's PEP. It's really, really important that everybody knows that you can get PEP at an emergency room, in some drugstores, or you just Google PEP near me, PEP near me. Or reach out to me, Scott at scottfried.com. It's right there, and I'll help you find PEP in wherever you are located. Get on the regimen up to 3 days of when the condom broke or didn't use one, and then you're protecting yourself. Then there's something known as TASP, treatment as prevention. So if you're on Grindr, on Scruff, on Tinder, on Bumble, on Hinge, on any other dating app, in the profile, you see that somebody says TASP, capital T, small as, capital P, treatment as prevention. That's code for I'm HIV positive, I'm on my meds, therefore I'm undetectable and I'm untransmittable. That's code. That's their way of saying they're on meds, without having to say I'm HIV positive in their profile. TASP, treatment as prevention. I'm treating my HIV and preventing you from getting infected. Then there's something known as doxypep, post-exposure prophylaxis for other STIs outside of HIV. Doxy being short for doxycycline, which is one of the antibiotics that your doctor will give you if you go there and test positive for gonorrhea or chlamydia. Not so much syphilis, but gonorrhea, chlamydia. So if this is so new, it's only like 15 months old, if that. Doxypep is basically doxycycline, antibiotic, morning after, like a morning after pill for STIs, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and sometimes syphilis. Remember this equation, please. If you're listening, write this down. 1, 2, 3. Write down 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3 for doxypep. One pill, one time. Only take it one time. 2 pills, 2 doxycycline pills at 100 milligrams each, and 3. That's within 3 days. So if you hooked up with somebody last night and you're concerned that you might have gotten chlamydia or gonorrhea from them, and if you don't know how, that's the egregious absence of comprehensive health education, because everybody listening right now should really know how to protect themselves from gonorrhea and chlamydia, ubiquitous STIs, but we don't, because it's not taught enough. So if you think you might be at risk for getting gonorrhea, chlamydia from what you did last night or up to 3 days ago, you can get on doxypep 1, 2, 3, one time within 2 pills within 3 days. And we're seeing only 15 months, it's lowering the amount of cases of gonorrhea and chlamydia. Not so much with syphilis, but it does work in some small part with that as well. Not for other STIs, trichomoniasis and vaginosis and all the H's, herpes, and not those. Gonorrhea, chlamydia. Did that thorough enough for at least now?
Yeah, and I'll just add on that actually, that you can get PEP and PrEP both on the NHS. You can
Right.
go to get PrEP in any sexual health clinic in the UK. and it's records that are not held anywhere else in the NHS. So that means that they're kept away from the rest of your records. And that also, if you need to get PEP out of hours, you can go to A&E and they can give it to you there. And also, you can also get free testing at sexual health clinics across the UK. And you can also get ones that are posted to you discreetly. They're even in packages that you that don't look like they're normal. They just look like a normal package. And if you're in London, you can get them from SHL, and they'll come to your door. You can do them at home and then post them back, and you'll get your results about a week later. I'm not sure about other parts of the country, but you can also get testing from a sexual health clinic.
Um, yeah, no, I'm a little conscious of time, but I want to ask a couple more questions, and I feel like there is so much more that I want to ask, and just not enough time in the day and the hours and everything. But I wanted to sort of move more towards sort of that personal sort of how um in a time where people weren't caring and like the public society weren't, actively caring about HIV, there was a lot of loss that sort of occurred. How did you sort of approach grief and loss, and also your own personal grief within yourself, in terms of like those feelings that you mentioned earlier and those experiences? Sorry, you're
You're on mute.
muted. Sorry.
Thank you. I didn't want you to hear my dog barking. He just went crazy for a second, so I was just muted. Grief and loss. I find it fascinating what just happened. You asked me about grief and loss, and then I heard you say, sorry, you're muted. That's what grief and loss do. They mute you right there. I was on mute for about 6 years. I didn't say a word. And so it was so internal. In fact, I got shingles under my right arm because I had so much stress that I was keeping on the inside. I was 25 with shingles. I I was muted. I like to think, I actually do think that when you're experiencing grief of any kind, whether it's the loss of a loved one or the loss of your potential, or you think the loss of your potential, loss of what you hoped your future would look like, there's this horizon, the horizon out there. And when you're not experiencing grief and loss, it's within reach. All your dreams, everything that you want to be. It's right there, just the shore, just the shore. There it is, the horizon. And then the grief steps in front of it, and the horizon is pushed further back. And it feels like you'll never reach those places. So I was 24 years of age, and I was planning to be this actor and get my union card and then get my own apartment living in New York City and start my life. And then I got infected, and the horizon, meaning all those dreams, were just pushed so far out of view, it felt impossible to reach them. And the important thing about grief and loss is that when that occurs, whatever yours is about, that you find someone to hold the horizon for you, to remind you that you wanted to get your own apartment, that you wanted to get your union card, that you wanted to be this famous actor, that you wanted to, whatever your longing and dreams were, whatever that horizon held, somebody holds it for you so that you can do the work of grieving, because it's work. Grief is work. And while you're doing that work, some people, the Khmer people and friends around you, will hold the dreams that you've had to put on hold, so they can hand them back to you when the time is right for you to be able to go on with your life, because that's why you're here, right? To be able to incorporate what you've learned from grief into the horizon. I'll say it again. One of the reasons we're here is to incorporate what we learned from the loss and the grief into all the dreams we had before the grief came, so we can make those dreams even richer. Did you get that? Okay. So one thing I want you to understand about grief, I hear this question a lot. Generally speaking, we think that grief we'll get over it. We'll get past the grief at some point. We'll move through the grief. But the way it really works is that grief moves through us in its own timeline. We can't rush it. And we grieve in different ways, but it moves through us And when it's done with us, when it's done breaking us, reforming us, reformatting us, then it will leave and we get to go back to the horizon. It moves through us when we sit down, and faster when we sit down and we accept it. So what I did back in those days was sit with my feelings in a support group with others who were a little further along on the journey. And then eventually new ones came in, and I realized I'm further along than them. And we moved through, and grief moves through us in its own pace. And it was in the presence of others that I was able to do it, modeling what they, well, trying to do what they were modeling. And what they were modeling mostly was, because they mostly died, 135 of them in my support group died, was modeling how to live with honesty and vulnerability and elegance up until your final breath. And they died before the age of 30, most of them. They were modeling that the opposite of dying isn't living, and the opposite of living isn't dying. They modeled for me through experiencing and showing their grief and their vulnerability that the opposite of living is not living a full, rich, vulnerable, expansive life. To be alive and not be really alive is a different type of death. So they modeled that for me, and I started the process of grieving until after about 4 or 5 years, I was able to see the horizon again and remember, oh, I wanted to perform. I wanted to present. And I realized I could do this. I could teach. I could teach others about what I've seen, what I've learned, right? The hero's journey, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, any Star Wars movie. You've got your hero that is reluctant and doesn't really want to be a hero and goes on a journey, goes through an ordeal, and comes out the other side having to tell everybody what they saw. You guys, here's what I saw. Here's what I learned. Dorothy, she wakes up from her dream. You were there, and you were there, and you were there, and you're never the same. You see the world in a different way, and you live your life in a different way. Great quote from a student at the University of Michigan many years ago who wrote me in an email. She said, isn't it funny in a sad sort of way that the thing that could kill you actually gives you life? The thing that could kill you actually gives you life. But here's the catch, only if you choose to see it differently. Beautiful prayer that I like to say every single day. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekach halo ba'olamo. Thanks, God. Shekach halo, that such things like this ba'olamo are in your world. Here's the catch. Here's the question. Because every prayer has a catch. Think about that. Every prayer has got a little something there. The catch is, what's the this? Shekachalo ba'olamo. Thank you that this exists in the world. What's the this? It's so easy for us to be thankful for a nice day that's warm and not rainy. We're so thankful for a day where life goes on. People laugh at our jokes. We have a good hair day, and we feel loved and seen and held in someone's heart. What about the days when we don't get any of those things? Can we still find the this that we're thankful for? Can we still find something to be thankful for? I am thankful for the heart in me that breaks when my father died, when my mother died, when I got my diagnosis, because it helps me to understand the hearts of others. It shows me that we're all in this together, that we're going through it, whatever it is. It's so important when grieving to find things for which we are grateful. And I did that. I started doing that. And it was living in the moment. So this is where the musical Rent comes in. We had a support group, and he wrote us into the musical No Day But Today from the musical, that big song. We said it. He put it to music. It's today. We're living in the moment. We're not going to that dangerous neighborhood we call the future in our minds. We go there alone. What if? What's going to happen next year, in 4 years? What's going to happen to me, to my country, to my friends, to my family? Staying right here, it's just today, no day but today. In this moment, I have some manner of command, not control, but I can command some things. I can command how I feel, how I take care of myself, and how I love today in this moment, especially when we're grieving. Did I get close to your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm
So
just gonna.
I'll end
Oh,
with
sorry.
this. I'll say, I'm sorry, I'll say one last thing about grief. The day arrives when you unmute yourself, as you just did.
Yeah.
You helped me do, right? The day arrives when we realize I need my voice out there again, and you come back into the world of the living. All right, you have final
Yeah,
question.
I have one final question, and
Yes.
there are so many other things that I really wanted to touch on, but maybe
Okay.
we'll do a 2.0 or do something else
I'll
to
come
sort of
in
spread.
person. I'll spend my
Yeah,
time out there in
definitely.
person. Okay.
But every conversation that I've had with you, the meeting I had before, and sort of your conversations on the podcast today, everything you have said, you always remain positive, and you always have something uplifting to say, even when you're telling something that is quite personal or quite difficult. And how do you find yourself able to give so much love and support without any judgment, especially in environments that might not reciprocate it? And what can you sort of give to the students and the people listening to this podcast today?
Beautiful, beautiful question. Thank you, Sam. Look, it's pretty simple, actually. I complain plenty. And if you were hanging out with me longer, you would know that I complain like anybody else, right? And I sometimes have the people around me who say, yeah, you may have pushed it a little too far this time. So I'm not always positive. But here's the thing. It's not easy, but it's simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's just a simple thing. And it's this. Consider how much energy it takes to be cranky. It just zaps you of energy. We think we feel better for a second when we press send on our DM or our tweets, or it's now called X's, or we say something. We feel so much better for 5 seconds, but then it zaps us of adrenaline and energy and good feelings, good vibes. It's as simple as that. Staying positive is buoying. Being negative and hanging around with other people who are negative, which by the way is so infectious, it's intoxicating. Hanging out and just being negative is a way of it takes too much energy. I once heard somebody say people gossip because they want to feel safe. So one of the ways to feel safe with other people is to gossip about somebody else, and you feel like there's a connection. But it takes a lot of energy in that way. The better way, the faster way, is to continue to find things that are positive. I learned in Hebrew school, Kita Gimel, Mrs. Rosenbush, third grade. She taught me about the laws of Lashon Hara, right? That if you go to bed at night and consider that maybe one day of your life, you didn't say one negative thing about somebody, to somebody, you didn't use this gift of speech, which is so connected to the soul. I was taught in Kita Gimel. You used it for good and nothing else but good, right? You can close your eyes that night and realize you did something with your life, with the soul that was given to you, that was purposeful and forward thinking and value driven and good. So I try to live my life as Mrs. Rosenbush and Kitai Gimel taught me, because anything other than that, it's going to come around. It's going to zap you of your energy. It's going to make things harder for you. We don't need to make it harder on ourselves, right? And there just isn't enough kindness. It just isn't. My mom would say to me when I was a little boy, she'd say, make nice, make nice. I'm talking little. When I was like 3 and 4 years old, she'd say, make nice, make nice. And so I never really broke it down. What is she saying? She was saying, make nice. It has to be created, right? It has to be in the world. Put it in the world. Because what you give, you get. Because everything comes from us. Put it in the world, you got more of it in the world. Does that make sense?
And unfortunately, that brings us to the end of today's episode of Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students. Um,
A big thank you to Scott for joining us and sharing your experiences and wisdom with us today. And thank you for listening. I hope you got a feel of the inspiration that we have today, and also learned a little bit as well. And take that away with you. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with others wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also follow UJS on all our socials, UJS_UK, for updates on future events, opportunities, and of course, episodes of this podcast.
If you need any support during this time, don't forget that UJS's 24/7 dedicated welfare support line is open. You can call us on 020 742 43281 to speak to one of our experienced staff or volunteers.
And don't forget to tune in next time to hear more incredible stories and meet some amazing people on Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students. But for now, that is goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me. I'll see you on campus soon. Bye. I need to figure out how you stop recording.
I didn't realize Sammy was on the podcast.